بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Alhamdulillah, we finished another section in the last class with Nabi Saleh alayhi salam, and now we are moving forward to talk about three great prophets in this chapter: Nabi Ibrahim, Ismail, and Ishaq, or in English, Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac. So they will all be covered in this chapter, which I believe is quite lengthy, but we'll cover all three of these prophets, inshallah. We left off on page 149 in book God's Emissaries. The author says, Nimrod, or in Arabic known as Numrud, was the first king to rule all of the Mesopotamia as a unified entity. He ruled from his capital, Al-Kutha Ruba, which was located in the vicinity of modern-day Kufa. He was the first king to ever mint gold and silver coins. However, he became so intoxicated with power that he deluded himself into thinking that he was a god. So he was like, we see with Fir'aun. Fir'aun also thought that he was God. So Nimrud, also thought that he was a god due to his power and the things that he collected. Nimrud's closest advisor and confidant was an astrologer and an idol maker named Azar. Once Azar spent the entire night studying the stars and planets and contemplating their unusual movements. So he was an astrologer. When we go to the footnote here, we see that Sheikh al-Ansari has discussed the legality of astrological calculations and predictions at great length in his opus Al-Maqasid. Maqasid is one of the higher books of fiqh that are studied in the Hawza toward the end of the time of their studies when they are dealing with books before they go to Dars Kharij. However, what concerns us here is not the legality, but the legitimacy of such predictions. So he's not saying the legality of this issue, but are the predictions legitimate or not? The predominant view of Shia scholars is that there is no causal link between the movements of the stars and planets and natural phenomena. They do, however, believe that their movements and formations are indicators of natural phenomena. However, for two main reasons, astrological predictions are usually incorrect and should never be relied upon. First, there is a tremendous amount of data to be considered that human beings with their limited capacities cannot consistently make accurate predictions. Then he says, second, the destiny of the world and its components is contingent upon human actions. This contingency is known as Bada, which we talked about in Aqaid before. Just because the stars tell us one thing today does not mean that what they predict will actually occur, since it's possible for something else to happen that changes the course of that destiny. And for example, we'll take the case of Nabi Yunus, alayhi salam. Now imagine if stars said that this storm was coming, and that it was the storm which was coming, this was the punishment of Allah that they saw. But when people saw this, they changed their ways, and they sought forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They all came out and repented to Allah, and they prayed for the Prophet to return to them. And they saw that this punishment was averted from them. And previously it was coming right at them, but then it was averted due to their actions. So these things are changed sometimes by the actions of humanity or people. They make the change, and then something happens, which we call bada. It appears as if it is going one way, but then something else is taking place. We mentioned many examples of this in our Aqa'id discussions. So he says, near dawn, this astrologer, Azhar, he burst into the room of Nimrud. He burst into the palace of Nimrud. He says, let's see here where it continues at the other page. He burst into there searching for his king. Upon entering the king's chamber, he exclaimed, I have seen something strange in the stars this night. According to my calculations, a child is to be born soon here who will bring an end to our religion and our civilization. He will destroy us and call people to a new religion. It is not long before he is born, and we must act fast. So he saw this thing in the stars. Another thing from amongst these the footnotes that the author has brought about this astrology, he says, a village chief from the Persians approached Imam Ali alayhi salam as he set out for battle against the Khawarij. After giving him salutation, he said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, the rising stars bring an ill omen. On a day like this, any sensible person would hide. This day is be a difficult day for you. 2 planets have changed places. The fire has faded from your zodiac. The war is not in your best interest. Imam Ali alayhi salam proceeded to inform him so many events that occurred throughout the world, about which the chief, despite his calculations, knew nothing. Then he said, my master, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I are neither of the east nor of the west. We are the pole around which the stars turn and the beacons to which the heavens look for guidance. As for this that you say the fire has faded from your zodiac, it was more fitting that you deem it a good omen for me than an ill omen. Its brilliance is still with me, and its burning has left me. This is a very complex issue. Make your calculations only if you think you are qualified. And in another tradition, he says, someone tells him not to ride to Nahrawan because the stars are not good. He replies, do you really think you can guide me to the moment in which I shall be saved from harm if I travel, and that you can warn me of the moment in which I shall be harmed if I do travel? If anyone believes you, he has thereby rejected the Quran and deemed himself needless of Allah's help in attaining what he likes and avoiding what he dislikes. Then he turned to the people and said, O people, beware of studying the stars, except for the purpose of navigating on land or on sea, for it leads one to fortune telling. The fortune teller is like a magician, and the magician is like an unbeliever, and the unbeliever is doomed to the fire. Then he ordered his troops, Bismillah, in the name of Allah, to march on. This is in Najj al-Balagha, sermon 79. So we see here that Amir al-Mu'mineen, alayhi salam, he is not listening to this person. This person is telling him, the star is in this position today, or the moon is in this position. Do not travel, do not do this, do not do that, based on these things. He said, he did not listen to these things. So we should not take heed to these things either. He says, where we left off. So these were some notes I found very interesting in the footnotes of this book. So Azar, he went in and told Nimrud that some child was going to be born, and he's going to bring a new religion, and he's going to destroy our religion that we have now. So Nimrud said, has he been conceived yet? Is this child conceived? Azhar replied, he has not. Hasn't happened yet. And that is why you have to act very quickly to separate all the men and the women of this town, of this city, so that this monster cannot be conceived. So immediately the edict was put into place, and it was executed. For several days, no men or women were allowed to have any contact with each other. Only in the palace and in Azhar's household was the edict not enforced, since they knew that the king and his closest advisors' families could never possibly give birth to a child that would come from this prophecy that would destroy their religion. This is what they were thinking. So all the men were not allowed to approach their women except the ones that worked in the palace, that were very close to him, and their families that were there. So it says, this is why Azhar's brother, Terah, on a side note, we see that there's a lot of confusion over Ibrahim's father's identity, because a lot of people are saying that Azhar was father of Ibrahim, and some are saying no. So we will take a quick look at this. But this is why, he was not banned from his wife, Sarah. Terah was married to his wife, Sarah, what we know from Quran. And it says she was a righteous lady and the daughter of a prophet. And that night they conceived that child. And this is why it didn't affect them, because they were in the household, because his brother was this advisor. So about Ibrahim's father, it says the Quran and many traditions refer to Azhar as the Ab. Ab in Arabic is father of Ibrahim. Nonetheless, for several reasons, we cannot take this usage literally and must construe Ab to mean uncle or maternal grandfather, not father. It says, I will first give evidence from the Quran and traditions that prevent us from accepting that Azhar was his father. I will then present evidence from the Quran that shows that Ab can indeed be used for uncle or grandfather. During Ibrahim's childhood, after exhausting all possible ways to guide Azhar, we know in his childhood, he was always trying to guide Azhar to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But finally, Ibrahim realized that Azhar was an enemy of Allah with no hope of ever reforming. So because of this, in Quran, in Surah 9, ayah 114, he says, I cut ties with him. On the other hand, when Ibrahim gets older, he offers a prayer for forgiveness for both of his parents. In Surah 14, ayats 39 through 41. The author, he says, definitely Azhar, who he severed ties with as a child, was not one of the two parents who he prayed for as an adult. This claim is bolstered by the fact that Azhar is always referred to as Ab, while he refers to his parents as Waliday. This is the Arabic word for parents. Also from traditions, Prophet Muhammad said, I was born of legitimate marriage, not fornication, right back to the time of Adam. So from the time of Adam, he was always coming from pure lineage. He also said, God perpetually transferred me through my ancestors from the loins of pure men to the wombs of pure women, until he brought me out into this realm of yours. He never defiled me with the filth of the age of ignorance. These traditions, they indicate that Prophet Muhammad all his ancestors back to Adam were pure, and they did not have the filth of the age of ignorance, which was the greatest thing from the age of ignorance. The greatest filth was kufr, polytheism. And we see that Azhar was clearly a kafir, a polytheist. He couldn't have been Ibrahim's father, hence Prophet Muhammad's ancestor, because if Prophet Muhammad is coming from lineage of Ibrahim all the way to Adam, how could we say that Prophet Ibrahim's father was kafir, if Prophet Muhammad himself is saying that all his ancestors come from a pure line? This is another proof. Some traditions explicitly call Abraham's father Taruch or Terah, and in the Old Testament he's referred to as Terah. The question remains, why do the verses of the Quran and the many traditions refer to Azhar as Ibrahim's Ab, or his father. One tradition from Imam Ali alayhi salam explains that Azhar was Ibrahim's father and that he raised him. Sometimes someone raises you and that you call them your father. For example, my grandfather that I've known all my life and my mother's father that she's known all her life is not her real father, but this is all she's known since she was a child. My grandmother remarried, and he raised my mother since she was an infant. So she calls him father, and this is what she knows as her father. So in this case, Imam Ali alayhi salam is saying that Azhar raised Ibrahim. He said, from this we can see that Ibrahim's biological father must have died before he escaped from the cave. We mentioned Ibrahim's youth in the cave. It's not without precedent to refer to a person's uncle or grandfather with the word Ab. This is not something strange, because the Quran refers to Ibrahim, Ishaq, Ismail as Yaqub's Ab. We see that when Ishaq was really his true father. We'll see in Quran, we'll mention here the ayat, which is a strong proof here. Let's see. Surah Baqarah, ayat 133. To read closer. أم كنت شهداء إذ حضر يعقوب الموت إذ قال لبنيه ما تعبدون من بعدي فقالوا نعبد إلهك وإله آبائك إبراهيم وإسماعيل وإسحاق إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون. Allah says in Quran, when death came to Yaqub, when he said to his sons, who will you worship after me? What will you worship after me? And they said, we will worship your God and the God of your fathers, Aba'ika. That's what it said, yeah, Aba'ika. Ibrahim, wa Ismail, wa Ishaq. So we'll worship the God of your fathers, of your father, Ibrahim, Ismail, and Ishaq. When really we see that Ishaq was the father of Yaqub. Ibrahim, on the other hand, was the grandfather, and Ismail was the uncle. But they were all fall under Aba'aka, under your fathers. So Quran calls other than, calls the uncle and maternal, the paternal uncle and the grandfather as Ab. So it is quite possible that in this ayat, or in this story with Ibrahim, that Azhar was not his literal father, it's not his biological father, but it was his uncle. So clearing up this doubt or this issue, we left off saying that this edict that Nimrud put into place to keep Ibrahim from being born, that the women and the men must be separated from each other, it did not apply to Azhar, which was his advisor, and his household, which was his brother. And his brother was married to Sarah, and they conceived and had this child. When Azhar learned that his brother and his sister-in-law had been together, he grew suspicious and called in the midwives. He ordered them to examine her and to inform him if they found any signs of pregnancy at all. Allah hid the signs from them, and they reported truthfully that they could not see any signs that she was pregnant. And we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concealed all signs of pregnancy in her to protect the unborn child Ibrahim alayhi salam. And we know that this also happened in the case of the mother of our 12th Imam with his mother Narjis alayhi salam. We see that they would come in and they were looking to, because they had the prophecy also that Mahdi, Ajallah Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, was to come and to, establish his rule on the earth. And this frightened those rulers at that time. So they were trying to search for the signs of pregnancy in the wives of Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam. And those signs were hidden miraculously. And similar to this situation has happened before in the case of the parents of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So Sarah finally gave birth to a boy on the first of Dhul Hijjah. She and Terah named him Ibrahim. Azhar discovered their secret and decided to take the infant to Nimrud and report him. Have no compassion for his nephew. Let's take him to have him killed by Nimrud. His loyalty to his king had numbed his humanity. Terah and his wife convinced him not to take his nephew to the king, lest he bear the full responsibility for that child's death. Rather, Sarah volunteered to take Ibrahim to a cave and to leave him there to meet his fate on his own terms. So Azhar said, okay, he's figuring this child would die anyway in this cave. So he let her take Ibrahim to the cave. So she secretly took Ibrahim out of the city to a cave that she knew about. And there she spent some time with her child and she nursed him one last time. And she begged Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, this is a daughter of a prophet. She is honored in sight of Allah. She asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect her child by some sort of miracle. And sought his forgiveness for not being able to fulfill her motherly duties that she wanted to fulfill, and more than what she could do. So it said she swaddled him, left him on the floor of the cave, and she had to leave him there. Imagine the pain of that separation, that she has to leave her child in this situation. But remember the trust of Allah that she must have had. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil, to have the trust in Allah that He will suffice for you. At the mouth of the cave, she stacked rocks until she had sealed the entrance completely, trusting in Allah. And then she left home. She went to home. See, it says, the author says, the prayers of the desperate and the faithful, they never go unanswered. Allah made milk flow by miracle from Ibrahim's thumb. He nursed himself on this nourishment that Allah had provided for him. And Allah khairur raziqeen. Allah is the best of providers. So he grew from this, and he grew at a fast rate also. And he grew in a day as another infant might grow in a week. So he grew at a different accelerated pace. On the seventh day of his birth, his umbilical cord and everything is coming off, he says. All of his needs were fulfilled by angels sent by Allah for this express purpose. So Allah supplied him with angels to take care of him. After some days, Ibrahim's mother took Terah's permission and escaped to the cave. She must have been wondering, what is going on with my son that I left in this cave? So when she saw him, she hugged him and she nursed him. And, she was amazed that, she was thankful that he was in this good situation. And we have to remember that, when we put our hope in Allah, we have to hope and have the confidence that Allah will suffice us. We shouldn't have doubts in this. We should be trusting in Allah that we are certain that He will take care of us and that He will take care of our needs and that we shouldn't make dua and then doubt if Allah can do this thing or not, because it seems impossible. Nothing is impossible for Allah. Look at this dua that this mother made for her child. This looks like an impossible situation, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took care of her dua and took care of her son Ibrahim. So she sealed the cave again one more time and left. And she visited him as often as she could without attracting any suspicion from other people, especially Azar. Months and years passed. Ibrahim grew very healthy, very strong, nurtured only by his mother's visits and the angels who were sheltering him, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's nourishment that He sent. We remember this also took place in the case of Maryam alayhi salam, that Allah would send fruits and food to her, which is mentioned in Quran. He says, in the intervening years, Terah passed away. He left with little choice. His widow married his brother Azhar. So after her husband passed away, the father of Ibrahim, she didn't have much of a choice, and she was forced into marrying the brother Azhar. You know, we look at this story about Ibrahim in the cave, and a lot of us, we are complaining about life, but could you imagine, having to grow up alone in a cave? None of us are having it this bad. This was very difficult, alone with no human interaction at all. And this is very difficult. And we see that the trust and dependence on Allah that Prophet Ibrahim had as well. And from the very beginning, Ibrahim alayhi salam experienced hardships, from the threat of death, from killing him as an infant at his birth, to dealing with his disbelieving uncle, Azar, to dealing with an idol-worshiping society, to dealing with the king wanting to kill him, to catapult him into the fire. All of these things in Ibrahim's life were difficult, something that we cannot even imagine, having to face these things. So whenever we find ourselves complaining about something, take a moment and think back about the life of our Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam and what he had to deal with. We did not have to grow up in a cave. We did not have to deal with, these type of people that he had to deal with. We didn't have someone trying to catapult us into a fire. Someone was trying to kill us, and these things like this. It says in Ibrahim's 13th year, despite his mother's warnings against the danger of being discovered, Ibrahim felt that he couldn't stay in that cave anymore. So now he was strong, and he had the ability to move those rocks that were in front of the cave. Rock by rock, he moved this thing, and he was able to escape from there. So he took his first step out of the cave, and it was dusk time, and he followed, his way, and he found his way to the city. So he wanted to find his mother. And then after some time, he reached a clearing, and crossing that clearing, he saw the walls of the city, and he had reached the capital of Kutha. He could hardly contain his excitement. He rushed towards those city gates, and he informed the guard that he wished to go to the house of Azar, who he had learned from his mother had become now his stepfather. When Azar first realized who Ibrahim was, he was shocked to see that he was still alive, because he said, okay, I told you to go put that child in the cave. Of course, he was going to die in that cave after a few days. So he was very shocked to see that he was alive. It said forebodings of the prophecy he had deciphered 13 years earlier still were present in his mind. He still remembered those things. However, his wife instinctively allied his worries by telling him that the gods of Kutha must have preserved their son precisely because he was not the boy in the prophecy. This passage seems that this would be done in taqiyya, to save Prophet Ibrahim from harm, while she was in fact a believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because as we have mentioned before, that the ancestors of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa all came from pure lineage and pure loins and pure wombs. So we see here that this obviously is done in taqiyya, hiding one's faith in order to save the life of other. Azhar softened to the boy as he saw his dead brother's resemblance in him. He embraced him, and he resolved to treat him as one of his own sons. So Ibrahim took, says he bathed, and he put fresh clothes on from one of his cousins. After living in this cave for 13 years, he was due for these things. They ate and became acquainted after their long hiatus. The next morning before sunrise, Azhar decided to take Ibrahim to the temple to offer thanks to the gods for his safe return. All these years, Ibrahim had been instinctively drawn towards Allah. He had many silent conversations with him, and he had worshipped him in his own way. He grew excited to think that he would finally learn how to worship him in the correct way. Meaning that, imagine he is thinking they are taking him to maybe a place of worship of Allah, like a masjid, that I am finally going to this place of worship where everyone is coming worshiping the same God as me, the one and true God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think we should end here because the next section is a little bit longer. And next week, inshallah, we'll see what happened to Ibrahim alayhi salam when he went to that temple that his uncle took him to, and how his life began to shift, and he became as one of those who stood up for justice and stood up for Tawheed and defended the religion of Allah against idol worship. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Thank you so much, Maulana.
Any questions? No questions.
So, inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Okay, I'll see everyone.
في امان الله. في امان الله.
خدا حافظ.
خدا حافظ.
في امان الله.
خدا حافظ. Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام.